I thought it might be helpful to learn how a circular sock machine actually knits a stitch. To start, this is a piece of hand knitting that I have done, just so you can see with the bigger stitches. This sits inside your cylinder like this. This is down in the tube, and this is the right side of your work, which is sitting right inside the cylinder. Each of these stitches is hanging over one of the needles, okay? Over the latch needles, just like this. This is your working yarn going off toward the cone, and a stitch is made. You reach up into the stitch from the previous row and pull up a loop. That's all there is to it. You reach into the next stitch and pull up a loop. When you're knitting on a circular sock machine, the way that works is that the needle is here. Ultimately, the needle pushes up so that the current stitch is below the latch, and then the new yarn gets grabbed in between the top part of the latch needle and the actual latch itself. It grabs hold of the yarn, and when the needle travels under the V-cam, it pulls the working yarn down with it. The weight inside the cylinder lifts this stitch from the previous row back off the back of the needle, and when the needle comes up, this new stitch is around the needle. So now let's take a look at how that looks on the machine. So the needles ride along the cylinder, and then here they start to travel on top of the flipper cams, the uplift cams, until they reach their highest point here. And then they reach their highest point here, and then they start to come back down. This spot is critical. This needle is the one that's going to grab the yarn. And so the needle needs to be the proper distance from the yarn feeder in order to grab the yarn. And then you can see this stitch has now, the needle has closed around the yarn. And then we'll look at the other side to see what happens here. So now we're looking from the other side of the yarn feeder. And we're looking at these stitches. So this is the one we were just looking at from the other side, where the needle has just closed around the yarn. Here, the needle has closed around the yarn and already pulled it through. That white stitch was the stitch from the previous row. This one pulls a little farther and a little farther. So this is where the height of the V-cam matters. This is where the needles are traveling under the V-cam, and this makes the length of the stitch. So the higher the V-cam, the shallower and the tighter the stitch. The lower the V-cam, the longer the stitch and the looser the tension. Here it starts to come back up, and then by here we're about at the resting height, and it will open back up the latches as they travel the rest of the way around the cylinder. I'm going to crank for a minute so you can watch that in action. And then from this angle as well. Notice how the stitches are dropping beneath the latches as the needles travel up the uplift cams. That's critical for the stitches to form properly. I have two final things that I want to share. First, it is critical that the latches are open as they come right to the edge of the yarn feeder. So that is one of the fastest ways to drop a stitch, is for the latches to be closed. If you're just knitting around normally, they typically will be open, but if you stop to repair something, or if you're lifting and lowering needles, you're casting on for the first time, that's when you really need to check and make sure that your latches are already always open. And then the other thing to know is that we were just watching how the stitches get formed over in this area of the camshell and the cylinder. That's when you're cranking clockwise. If you're cranking counterclockwise, which you would do when turning toes and heels, for example, the working area becomes here. So that whole thing is reversed, and it's over this cam where you can just see this knob. This is the side where the stitches would get made. The needles travel up the uplift cam now coming from 9 o'clock, and then the stitches get formed as the needles travel back down towards 6 o'clock. I hope that helps understand how the stitches get made on your circular sock knitting machine. Happy cranking! Visit us at deanandbean.com and please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.